I am Kendra. I am 32 years old and somehow still paying for the delusion of my toxic family. As a successful commercial real estate broker, I thought I had built a fortress around my finances. Last Sunday, I stood in the marble bathroom of the Ritz-Carlton staring at my banking app. The screen blurred as my brain tried to process the numbers. $125,000 was gone. My balance was exactly $14.12. I marched down to the VIP dining room and slammed my phone onto the table. My mother simply sipped her mimosa and smirked. "What is the big deal?" she laughed. "You are young and your business is doing fine. You will earn it back in a few months." Jamal needed a wedding that showed his new wife's family we have class. That morning, I did not scream. I made one phone call that would send my mother to federal court and leave my brother homeless. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family member who felt entitled to your hard-earned success. Growing up in Atlanta meant hustle and survival, but inside our house the rules were vastly different. My mother Brenda had a very specific hierarchy. My older brother Jamal was the undisputed king. He was the golden child who could do no wrong even when he was dropping out of college or quitting his third job in a year. I was the workhorse. I was expected to be quiet, get good grades, and eventually fund the lifestyle they both believed they deserved. My sanctuary was my ambition. I built my commercial real estate brokerage from the ground up, working 80-hour weeks, while Jamal bought designer sneakers on my mother's credit cards. But yesterday was supposed to be his peak. Jamal had just married Chloe, a white woman from a wealthy suburban family. Chloe believed she was marrying into black excellence. She thought Jamal was a wealthy entrepreneur because my mother rented luxury cars and bought designer suits using my money to keep up the charade. I paid for the rehearsal dinner, I paid for the floral arrangements, I even paid for the 6-star hotel suites. I drew the line at paying for the entire wedding outright. But my mother decided my boundaries were optional. Let us go back to that morning in the hotel bathroom. The cold water running from the gold faucet did nothing to snap me out of the shock. My chest tightened as I refreshed the app 3 times. The transaction history showed a wire transfer authorized in person at a local branch the day before the wedding. $125,000 withdrawn in a single sweep. My emergency fund, my operational capital, everything was wiped out, leaving me with enough to buy a sandwich. I did not cry. I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over me. I dried my hands on a plush towel, smoothed down my silk dress, and walked out of the suite. The hallway felt miles long, but my steps were deliberate. I took the elevator down to the lobby where the post-wedding brunch was in full swing. The VIP dining room echoed with the sound of clinking crystal and pretentious laughter. There they were, sitting at the center table. Jamal looked smug in his tailored linen suit, leaning back like a billionaire. Chloe was beaming in her custom bridal brunch outfit. My mother Brenda was holding court at the head of the table, peeling a lobster tail and waving a silver fork in the air as she told an exaggerated story about our family legacy. I walked straight up to their table, ignoring the greetings from extended relatives. I tossed my phone directly onto my mother's porcelain plate. The heavy device clattered loudly, silencing the immediate area. I pointed at the screen displaying the $14 balance. "Where is my money?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. My mother did not even flinch. She picked up her napkin, wiped her mouth, and let out that dismissive laugh I had hated since childhood. She looked at me as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum over a toy. "What is the big deal?" She laughed loudly for everyone nearby to hear. "You are young and your business is doing great. You will easily earn it back in a few short months." Jamal needed a wedding that showed his new wife's family we have true class. She casually took another sip of her cold morning mimosa, completely unbothered by my ruined life. I smiled. I did not scream. My smile was terrifyingly calm. Before I could respond to my mother's audacity, Chloe inserted herself into the conversation. She let out a condescending sigh and placed her manicured hand over Jamal's. Kendra, do not be jealous just because you are single, she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. It is tacky to bring up money at a wedding brunch. We are enjoying our first morning as husband and wife. You are ruining the aesthetic. She looked at me like I was hired help, wandering into the VIP area. Chloe truly believed she had married into a wealthy black dynasty. She thought Jamal was a tech investor because of the lie he spun. She thought my mother was a retired socialite. She had no idea the illusion was funded by my 80-hour workweeks. I shifted my gaze to my new sister-in-law. My calm smile remained frozen. I looked at her expensive blowout and her tennis bracelet. Tacky, I repeated, letting the word roll off my tongue. You want to talk about tacky, Chloe? Let us talk about tacky. What is truly tacky is wearing a $15,000 Vera Wang bridal gown that you did not pay for while insulting the person who actually funded it. Chloe blinked her perfectly applied false eyelashes, fluttering in deep confusion. What are you talking about? She scoffed, crossing her arms defensive. Jamal bought my dress as a wedding gift. Jamal shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face suddenly losing his arrogant glow. He reached for his iced water glass, looking anywhere but at me. I did not let him speak. Jamal did not buy your dress. Chloe? I said, my voice slicing through the dining room chatter with surgical precision. Jamal has not had a steady paycheck since 2020. I bought your dress. I also pay the monthly note on the Mercedes-Benz he drove you away in last night. And while we are listing my tacky financial contributions, I am the one who pays the mortgage on the sprawling colonial house my mother currently lives in. Yes, I mean the exact same house where you took all your extravagant bridal portraits last week. The entire table fell completely silent. The relatives sitting nearby, who had previously been enjoying the drama, suddenly looked down at their breakfast plates. They knew the truth all along, but no one had ever dared to say it out loud. My mother slammed her crystal mimosa glass down on the table, spilling orange juice and champagne onto the pristine white linen tablecloth. "How dare you air family business in front of strangers?" she hissed, her eyes darting nervously toward Chloe's wealthy parents, who were sitting at the next table over, completely oblivious. "You are embarrassing your brother on his special day." "I am not embarrassing him, Mother," I replied smoothly, not breaking eye contact with Chloe. "I am simply clarifying the financial portfolio of this so-called wealthy family." Chloe looked physically ill. The color drained entirely from her face as she turned her head slowly toward Jamal. "Jamal? Tell me she is lying," Chloe demanded, her voice trembling slightly. "Tell me you paid for my dress. Tell me you own that luxury car." Jamal opened his mouth, but he stuttered badly. He looked at our mother for help, but for the first time in her life, Brenda had absolutely nothing to say to save him. She just glared at me with pure, unfiltered hatred. Jamal wiped his sweating forehead and finally forced out a weak, pathetic laugh. "Babe, do not listen to her," he stammered, trying to grab Chloe's hand. "She is just acting crazy because she has always been insanely jealous of me. We will sort this out later. Let us just eat our food." He tried to put his arm around Chloe, but she pulled away sharply, as if he had burned her. Her eyes darted back and forth between Jamal and me, piecing together the terrifying reality that she had just legally bound herself to a broke man. The fairy tale she had been bragging about to all her sorority sisters was collapsing right in front of her avocado toast. The tension in the room was so incredibly thick you could cut it with a butter knife. Jamal took a deep breath, visibly preparing to launch into a full-blown, elaborate lie to save his fragile marriage and his bruised ego. He opened his mouth to speak, but he never got the chance. Right at that exact second, the sharp ringing of my phone shattered the heavy silence. I looked down at the bright screen. The caller ID flashed immediately. It was the fraud department from my corporate bank calling me back. I answered the call and immediately pressed the speakerphone button, placing the device right back onto the center of the pristine white tablecloth. "Hello, is this Kendra Washington?" the deep voice on the other end asked, sounding very professional and incredibly urgent. "Yes, I am here listening," I replied, leaning forward slightly. Ms. Washington, this is Mr. Davis from the Corporate Fraud Division of your bank. We are calling regarding the flagged withdrawal of $125,000 that occurred yesterday afternoon. The entire table froze. The loud clinking of silverware against expensive china stopped. Even the extended relatives who had been pretending not to listen suddenly leaned in closer to hear every single word. Mr. Davis, can you please confirm for the people sitting at this table exactly how that money was authorized for withdrawal? I asked, my eyes locked intensely on my mother. Certainly, Ms. Washington, he responded, his voice echoing through the speaker. The funds were transferred via an in-person wire request at our downtown branch. The individual presented a notarized power of attorney document listing Brenda Washington as your legally authorized financial proxy. Chloe gasped out loud, immediately covering her mouth with her trembling hand. Jamal crossed his arms, looking highly annoyed by the grand theft his family had just committed. My mother. Brenda rolled her eyes and picked up another piece of lobster tail with her silver fork as if we were discussing the weather. Thank you, Mr. Davis, that will be absolutely all, Brenda practically shouted at the phone, leaning over her plate. She reached across the table, attempting to hang up the call, but I snatched the device away and ended the connection myself. I stared directly at her, waiting for some kind of logical explanation, or perhaps a basic apology. Instead, she sat up very straight, adjusted her designer silk scarf, and puffed out her chest with ridiculous pride. I am your mother, Brenda announced loudly, unashamed of her actions. That power of attorney document is perfectly legal and valid. You signed it when you were 18 years old and stuck in the intensive care unit with a ruptured appendix. I saved that paperwork in my safe deposit box all these years because I knew one day you would finally owe me for giving you life and raising you under my roof. You have more than enough money sitting in those accounts. It is my fundamental right as your mother to access those funds whenever your own blood family is in desperate need of financial support. I stared at her in absolute sickening disbelief. My own mother honestly believed that carrying me in her womb gave her a permanent all-access pass to my hard-earned corporate bank accounts. She had secretly kept an outdated medical proxy document from 14 years ago, specifically waiting to rob me blind when the timing was right. It was the ultimate betrayal and manipulation. She did not ask me for a personal loan. She did not beg me for financial help. She simply walked right into a local bank branch and stole my entire livelihood to fund a superficial party for her favorite child. Jamal then leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on the table. He actually smirked, as if this was all just a minor childish misunderstanding that he was entirely too important to care about. Look, Kendra. He sighed heavily, sounding incredibly bored by the whole dramatic situation. Mom took care of the wedding expenses like a good mother should. Stop embarrassing our family in front of my new wife and her wealthy parents. You are acting completely unhinged over some replaceable cash. Just go home and cool off for a few days. We can talk about how to better manage your finances later, when you are acting rational. Just leave right now before you make an even bigger fool of yourself and ruin my special honeymoon weekend. He waved his hand dismissively, pointing toward the grand exit of the dining room, expecting me to obey his command like always. I did not move a single muscle. The deep coldness inside me solidified into pure, unbreakable steel. I reached slowly into my designer leather tote bag and pulled out my tablet. I tapped the glass screen a few times, deliberately pulling up a very specific digital document. I slid the bright screen across the table, pushing it right over my mother's expensive breakfast plate. I smiled coldly, looking directly into Jamal's arrogant eyes. "Leave," I asked softly, my voice carrying enough heavy weight to finally make him flinch in absolute fear. Oh, Jamal, my sweet, oblivious brother, I am certainly not the person who is going to be forcefully escorted out of this luxury hotel by security guards later today. I kept my eyes locked on Jamal as I rotated the tablet toward him and our mother. The document on the bright screen was not a personal bank statement. It was a formal corporate ledger. You see, Mother, I began, my voice incredibly calm and measured. I recently restructured my entire financial portfolio. When my brokerage firm took on larger commercial contracts, my personal and business assets were completely separated to comply with state real estate regulations. I tapped the highlighted line on the screen. The account you brazenly marched into and drained yesterday was not my personal savings account. It was not my checking account. It was a highly regulated corporate escrow account. Jamal stared blankly at the screen, clearly not comprehending the massive legal avalanche heading straight for him. Chloe, however, visibly stopped breathing. She worked in corporate human resources and instantly knew exactly what the word escrow meant. My mother just waved her hand in the air, looking completely unimpressed by my explanation. Escrow checking savings. It is all exactly the same thing, Brenda huffed, crossing her arms over her chest. It is your name on the paperwork, and you have plenty of money to spare. Stop trying to confuse us with your fancy business terms. You are just upset because I took the initiative to ensure your brother had the wedding he rightfully deserved. I shook my head slowly, marveling at her breathtaking ignorance. No, mother, it is not the same thing at all, I corrected her clearly. That specific account holds third-party funds. That $125,000 was a good faith deposit from a massive international corporate client. They transferred that money to secure a massive commercial high-rise development downtown. It is not my money to spend, not my money to... It is not your money to steal. It belongs to a billion-dollar investment firm, and they are currently waiting for that exact deposit to clear the title company. Brenda rolled her eyes, leaning back in her plush chair as if I were boring her. Well, just tell your little client there was a minor banking delay, she suggested, casually reaching for her mimosa again. Tell them the bank made a technical error. Money is money, Kendra. You run a successful business, so just move some funds around from another account and cover the difference until you earn it back. It is really not that complicated. You are making a huge, dramatic scene over nothing. Jamal nodded in agreement, looking relieved by our mother's absurdly simplistic logic. Yeah, Kendra, Jamal chimed in, pointing a finger at me. Just do your finance magic and fix the paperwork. We are family, and family helps each other out. Do not ruin my honeymoon over a simple accounting error. I rested my hands on the table and leaned in close. The coldness in my eyes finally made my mother's arrogant smirk falter. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The raw truth was devastating enough on its own. You both honestly believe you can just lie to a multinational corporation? I asked softly. You think I can just magically shuffle stolen funds to cover up a felony? Mother, the document you used was a revoked medical proxy from 14 years ago. You presented it to a teller crossing state lines since the bank routing went through their national headquarters in New York. Taking money from a corporate escrow account across state lines using fraudulent legal documents is not a petty family dispute. It is not a simple misunderstanding, it is federal wire fraud. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Chloe dropped her silver fork onto her china plate with a very loud clatter. She looked completely terrified. Brenda blinked rapidly, her brain finally attempting to process the extreme severity of the legal terms I had just used. Federal, she repeated weakly, her voice completely losing its commanding edge. Do not be ridiculous, Kendra. No one is bringing the federal government into family business. They do not care about a mother helping her son. I leaned back in my plush chair and took a slow sip of my iced water. Oh, Mother, they care very much, I assured her smoothly. In fact, they take stolen corporate funds extremely seriously. You see, when an escrow deposit goes missing, the system does not wait for any explanation. It triggers an automatic alert. The compliance department does not ask politely before taking action. They follow strict protocols to recover their assets. They will meticulously trace every single penny you spent on this lavish weekend. This wedding was funded by a massive federal crime, and the authorities are already actively securing all the evidence they need to put you both behind prison bars immediately. The word immediately hung in the air like a death sentence. Chloe did not waste a single second. Her hands shook violently as she dug into her sparkling bridal clutch and pulled out her phone. Her perfectly manicured fingers practically hammered the bright screen as she frantically typed the words, "Federal wire fraud penalty." We all watched her in a suffocating silence. Even my mother finally stopped chewing her food and placed her silver fork back onto the table. Chloe stared at her screen, and I watched the exact moment her entire world shattered. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of terror. "Up to 20 years in federal prison. Fines up to $250,000. She looked up from her phone and stared at Jamal as if he had suddenly morphed into a terrifying monster. "You are going to prison?" she gasped. "I just married a felon. My perfect luxury wedding is an actual crime scene." She pushed her chair back, scraping it against the polished marble floor. She desperately wanted to put as much physical distance between herself and Jamal as possible. Jamal watched his wealthy wife recoiling from him, and something inside his fragile ego snapped. The smooth, charming facade he wore so effortlessly vanished, leaving behind only the desperate little boy who always needed his mother to clean up his messes. He pushed his own chair back so hard it crashed to the floor. He stepped aggressively around the table and marched right up to where I was sitting. He stood directly over me, trying to use his height and broad shoulders to physically intimidate me into total submission. It was the exact same aggressive tactic he used when we were teenagers, whenever he wanted me to cover up his mistakes. He slammed his fist down onto the table, making the silverware rattle and the glasses clink wildly together. "You listen to me right now, Kendra." He snarled, his face turning an ugly shade of crimson red. "I am your older brother, and you are going to respect me. You are going to pick up that phone right now, call your bank and tell them you personally authorized that withdrawal. Tell them it was a corporate bonus. Tell them it was a generous wedding gift. I do not care what elaborate lie you have to invent, but you are going to fix this. You are going to protect your mother, and you are going to protect my new marriage. If you do not fix this right now, you are dead to us. You will be entirely cut off from this family forever." He breathed heavily, looming over me, expecting me to immediately cower in fear. He expected the old Kendra to shrink back, apologize, and eagerly clean up his mess just to keep the toxic family peace. But the old Kendra was gone. I did not flinch. I did not lean back in my chair. I simply sat there, perfectly composed, looking up at his desperate, sweating face. "Cut off from the family," I repeated, letting out a soft, genuine laugh. "Jamal being cut off from this family is not a threat. It is my ultimate goal. You cannot threaten me with a good time. I am the only reason our mother has a roof over her head. I am the only reason you are wearing that custom-tailored suit. You have nothing without me, and you just threw away your only lifeline for a single weekend of fake luxury." I slowly raised my left wrist and tapped the glass screen of my Apple Watch. A new notification had just popped up, confirming everything I already knew was happening behind the scenes. Jamal glared at my watch, his chest heaving with misplaced anger and deep financial panic. "Fix it," he demanded again, his voice cracking slightly, betraying his deep internal terror. "Fix the paperwork, Kendra, before I make you regret it." I lowered my wrist and looked him dead in his panicked eyes. "I cannot fix it, Jamal," I said, my voice slicing through his pathetic demands like a freshly sharpened blade. "I could not fix it even if I actually wanted to save you. Corporate escrow accounts are not monitored by humans who can be manipulated or easily lied to. They are monitored by highly advanced automated financial software. The moment that massive amount of money left the account, the system automatically flagged it as stolen corporate funds. The billionaire corporate client was immediately alerted to the massive security breach. They did not call me to ask for a polite explanation. They followed their strict corporate compliance protocols. They notified the Federal Bureau of Investigation exactly 20 minutes ago, and they are on their way here right now. The silence that followed my declaration was absolute and heavy. Jamal stood frozen over me, his fists unclenched and hanging uselessly at his sides. My mother opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Before either of them could formulate another pathetic lie or empty threat, a sudden presence at the edge of our table shifted the tension. It was the hotel general manager, formally dressed and flanked by two extremely burly security guards. He was holding a sleek black leather folio pressed tightly against his chest. He absolutely did not look happy. "Excuse me for interrupting your brunch," he said, his tone entirely stripped of the usual customer service warmth. "Mr. Washington, we have a very serious situation regarding your final unpaid balance." Jamal blinked rapidly, trying to quickly rebuild his shattered wealthy facade. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, trying to sound authoritative, but his voice squeaked. "It is probably just a daily spending limit issue. Just run the card again. I authorized the charges for the penthouse suites this morning." The manager shook his head slowly. "We have run the card 3 times, sir. The charge for $15,000 was completely declined by your financial institution. In fact, we received a severe alert code instructing us to retain the physical card immediately." The manager placed the black folio onto the table and opened it, revealing Jamal's platinum credit card cut entirely in half. Jamal stared at the plastic pieces in pure shock. "That is impossible," he stammered, reaching into his tailored jacket pocket. "Here, just take my backup card. It is linked to a different account." He tossed a blue card onto the silver platter. The manager did not even bother walking away. He pulled a portable payment terminal from his jacket pocket and swiped the blue card right there in front of everyone. A loud, harsh beep echoed through the quiet dining room. "Declined," the manager stated flatly. My mother immediately jumped up aggressively, shoving her designer purse onto the table. "This is ridiculous," she shouted, her voice cracking with rising panic. "My son has plenty of money. Your hotel machines are clearly broken. Here, take my premium card. Run it for the full amount right now." She practically threw her gold card at the manager. He swiped it without a single change in his expression. Another harsh beep sounded. "Declined." The manager repeated, his eyes narrowing. I sat back in my chair and took a very slow, satisfying sip of my iced water. "Let me save you the trouble of swiping any more plastic," I said calmly, projecting my voice so the entire VIP dining room could hear every single word. "None of those cards are going to work. When the federal authorities are notified of wire fraud crossing state lines, they do not politely ask for the money back. The very first thing they do is lock down the financial network. They trace the stolen corporate funds and immediately freeze every single associated account. Your checking accounts, your savings accounts, your credit lines, everything is frozen solid. You currently have zero access to any money anywhere." The color drained from my mother's face, leaving her looking gray and suddenly very old. She collapsed back into her chair, clutching her chest. Jamal stood completely still, his eyes wide with animalistic terror as the reality of his ruined life finally crashed down on his shoulders. But the most explosive reaction came from the bride. Chloe had been sitting frozen, clutching her phone, but my words completely snapped her out of her silent shock. She stood up so fast her chair tipped over backward and slammed onto the marble floor. "You have no money!" she screamed at Jamal, her voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "Every single dime you spent on me was stolen. You lied to me about your tech company. You lied to me about your investments. You are completely broke." Jamal held his hands up defensively, taking a step back from his enraged new wife. "Chloe, baby, please calm down," he begged, his voice trembling. "We can fix this. I will figure something out. Just let me explain everything to you in private." "There is nothing to explain, you pathetic liar," Chloe shrieked, pointing a trembling finger right in his face. "You dragged me into a massive federal crime. I am wearing a stolen dress. I just slept in a stolen hotel suite. My parents are sitting right over there believing you are a millionaire. You are nothing but a cheap criminal who uses his younger sister to fund a fake, luxurious lifestyle. I am so deeply disgusted by you." The entire restaurant was now openly staring at our table in complete and utter disbelief, watching the glorious destruction. The heavy oak doors of the VIP dining room suddenly swung open with a loud thud that echoed across the polished marble floors. The hotel security guards stepped aside to make way for two tall men dressed in impeccably tailored dark suits. They moved with a terrifying synchronized purpose. They did not look like local police officers responding to a noise complaint. They walked with the cold, calculated authority of the federal government. Gold badges hung prominently from their belts, glinting brightly under the crystal chandeliers overhead. The entire restaurant, which had just been captivated by Chloe's screaming, suddenly fell dead silent. You could hear a pin drop as the two federal agents marched directly toward our table. The hotel general manager quickly stepped back, giving them a wide berth. My mother Brenda took one look at the approaching agents, and her entire demeanor shifted in a fraction of a second. The arrogant, demanding matriarch who had just ordered me to fix her felony vanished completely. In her place appeared a frail, terrified elderly woman. As the lead agent stopped at the head of our table, Brenda immediately began to hyperventilate. She clutched her pearl necklace with one shaking hand and pressed the other against her chest, gasping for air as if she were having a sudden massive heart attack right there. "Are you Brenda Washington, the lead agent?" asked his voice deep and completely devoid of any emotion. He did not introduce himself or his partner. He did not ask how her morning was going. He just stared down at her with eyes like pure ice. Brenda let out a loud, dramatic sob, letting genuine tears stream down her carefully powdered face. "Oh, please, officer," she cried, her voice shaking pitifully. "There has been a terrible misunderstanding today. I am just a devoted mother trying to help my son on his wedding day. I go to church every single Sunday morning. Ask my pastor. I have never been in trouble with the law in my entire life. My daughter here just made a simple banking error and now the computer systems are all mixed up. Please, you are scaring an old woman with a severe heart condition." She reached out with a trembling hand, trying to lightly touch the agent's dark sleeve in a desperate plea for basic human sympathy. The agent did not move an inch. He did not offer her a glass of water or a chair to rest. He simply looked down at her trembling hand until she awkwardly pulled it back. "Mom, I am going to need you to stand up and place your hands where I can see them," the agent instructed, ignoring her entire theatrical performance. "We have a federal warrant regarding the unauthorized transfer of $125,000 across state lines." Brenda let out a loud wail, sinking lower into her plush dining chair. "Lord Jesus, help me!" she screamed, rocking back and forth uncontrollably. "I did not know the money belonged to a corporation. I thought it was my daughter's savings. I am her mother. I have rights to her money. I did not know it was illegal. Please do not take me away from my family." The second agent pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. The metallic clink sounded incredibly loud in the completely silent dining room. "And are you Jamal Washington?" he asked, turning his cold gaze toward my brother, who was still standing near his overturned chair. Jamal had been staring at the shiny handcuffs with his mouth wide open. The moment the federal agent said his name, the instinct for pure self-preservation finally took over. The golden child, the man who had happily spent stolen corporate funds on designer suits and luxury suites, looked at the mother who had sacrificed absolutely everything for him. He did not step in front of her to protect her. He did not try to explain the complicated situation or take the blame like a real man should. Instead, Jamal physically jumped backward, putting as much distance between himself and our mother as possible. His face twisted into a mask of pure, desperate cowardice. He raised a trembling finger and pointed it directly at the woman who had worshipped him his entire life. It was her. Jamal screamed, his voice echoing loudly across the quiet dining room. "I had absolutely nothing to do with it. She did it all. She went to the bank by herself. She signed the papers. I did not know where the money came from. I swear to God I thought she had savings. She lied to me. She is the criminal, not me. Take her. Take her away." Brenda stopped crying instantly. Her mouth dropped open in shock. Brenda stopped crying instantly. Her mouth dropped open in shock. Exactly 24 hours later, that exact expression of stunned betrayal was still etched into my memory as I sat in the freezing cold conference room of the FBI field office. The chandeliers and marble floors of the Ritz-Carlton had been replaced by harsh fluorescent lights and cheap gray carpet. I sat down across a dented metal table from Special Agent Miller, handing over a thick manila folder filled with printed documents. I did not need a lawyer because I had absolutely nothing to hide. Here is the original medical power of attorney document, I explained, sliding the top paper across the table. As you can clearly see, the revocation clause was officially filed and notarized 14 years ago when I was discharged from the hospital. My mother retained a physical copy, but it has been legally void for over a decade. Next to it is the corporate ledger proving the origin of the $125,000. The funds were transferred directly from the holding company of my client. Agent Miller meticulously reviewed the documents, nodding slowly as he cross-referenced the account numbers. "This is incredibly thorough, Ms. Washington," he noted, his voice devoid of any judgment or emotion. Your mother presented the bank teller with a heavily redacted photocopy of the original document. Because your personal accounts and corporate accounts were linked under your master profile, until recently, the teller bypassed standard protocol. I nodded, keeping my face perfectly neutral. Through the large two-way mirror on the wall to my left, I had a direct line of sight into the adjacent interrogation room. My mother was sitting in there, and she was putting on the performance of a lifetime. Her designer silk scarf was wrinkled, and her carefully styled hair was a complete mess. She was pacing furiously back and forth across the small room, waving her arms frantically at the agent assigned to question her. Even through the soundproof glass, I could easily read her exaggerated body language. She was throwing a massive tantrum. She slammed her hands down on the metal table, pointing aggressively at the ceiling. Agent Miller noticed where my eyes had drifted and let out a very faint sigh. "She has been demanding to speak to her pastor for the last 3 hours," he mentioned, casually flipping through my corporate ledger. "She keeps insisting that the church will vouch for her moral character and that this is all just a terrible family misunderstanding that should be handled in private. She refuses to accept that federal crimes cannot be absolved by a Sunday morning prayer." I watched my mother dramatically collapse into her metal chair, burying her face in her hands. The sweet elderly church lady routine had completely failed her, so she was resorting to pure aggressive victimhood. For 32 years, I had watched her use that exact same manipulation tactic to bend our entire family to her will. If Jamal broke a window, she would cry until my father paid for it. If Jamal failed a class, she would scream at the teacher until the grade was changed. She was always the ultimate enabler, fiercely protecting her golden boy from any real-world consequences. But the federal government did not care about her tears. The heavy metal door to my conference room clicked open and a second agent stepped inside. He leaned down and whispered something quietly into Agent Miller's ear. A brief look of mild amusement crossed Miller's face before he turned his attention back to me. The agent closed the door, leaving us alone again. I tore my gaze away from the glass window and looked at him. "No problem at all, Ms. Washington," Agent Miller replied, leaning back in his chair and folding his hands together. "In fact, your mother just made our investigation significantly easier. It seems the reality of a 20-year prison sentence has finally broken through her religious facade. You see, yesterday at the hotel, your brother loudly accused her of acting entirely alone. He claimed he had no idea the money was stolen." "I remember," I said softly. "Well," Agent Miller continued, a sharp edge of irony creeping into his professional tone, "your mother just gave a full formal confession. But she is not falling on her sword. She just threw your brother directly under the bus. She is officially claiming that Jamal was the criminal mastermind behind the entire operation. According to her statement, Jamal manipulated her and threatened to cut her out of his life if she did not secure the funds for his luxury wedding. She is pinning the entire fraud charge on him to save herself. They are completely turning on each other. They are completely turning on each other." I smiled warmly at Agent Miller, thanked him for his time, and walked out of the federal building into the bright Atlanta sunshine. My phone was buzzing constantly with panicked text messages from various extended relatives, but I ignored every single one of them. I had a business to run and a billion-dollar client to reassure. By the time I arrived at my high-rise office building the next morning, I felt completely rejuvenated. I was sitting behind my custom mahogany desk, reviewing the final contract, when the glass door to my office suddenly flew open. My receptionist stood there looking deeply apologetic, but the woman pushing past her gave her absolutely no choice. It was Chloe. The glowing bride from exactly 48 hours ago looked like she had just survived a natural disaster. Her expensive blonde extensions were tangled, and her eyes were bloodshot from crying. She was wearing the designer sweatpants, and she looked absolutely unhinged. "You can go back to your desk, Sarah," I told my receptionist calmly. "Close the door, please." The moment the glass door clicked shut, Chloe slammed her hands down onto my desk. The progressive, open-minded persona she had maintained for 2 years vanished. She dropped the woke ally mask in a split second and let her true colors shine brightly under the fluorescent office lights. "You planned this," she screamed, her voice shrill and echoing off the glass walls. "You deliberately let me marry into your fraudulent ghetto family just to humiliate me. You tricked me into thinking he was a successful entrepreneur. My parents paid for the honeymoon, and now we are the laughingstock of our country club. You people are all exactly the same, always looking for a quick scam to rip off hardworking people like us." I did not blink. I slowly closed my laptop and folded my hands neatly on top of the smooth wooden desk. I looked at her messy hair and her smeared makeup. "You people," I repeated softly, tasting the bitter racism she had just comfortably spat out. "That is very interesting terminology, Chloe. Did you use those words when you were happily swiping my credit cards to pay for your catering, or bragging to your sorority sisters about marrying a wealthy investor? You did not care about Jamal's character. You did not care about his lack of ambition. You never loved my brother Chloe. You loved my credit score. You loved the illusion of proximity to wealth, and you were so blinded by your own gold-digging greed that you never even bothered to ask him for a simple bank statement." Chloe let out a loud, dramatic gasp, clutching her chest as if I had physically struck her. "How dare you call me a gold digger?" she shrieked, her face turning a bright shade of red. "I was deeply in love with him. I thought he was a good man. I gave him the best years of my youth, and he ruined my entire life." I reached into the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a thick, crisp manila envelope. I tossed it onto the center of the desk, right between her shaking hands. "You are 29 years old, Chloe," I stated flatly. "You still have plenty of youth left to scam another man who actually has a trust fund. But since you are currently legally bound to a federal criminal, I decided to do you a massive favor. My corporate attorneys work on retainer, and they were extremely bored yesterday afternoon. They drafted these annulment papers based on the legal grounds of severe financial fraud and deception. It completely severs your marriage to Jamal effectively immediately. No messy divorce proceedings, no drawn-out court battles, and most importantly, no shared debt liability for the $125,000 he currently owes the federal government." Chloe stopped screaming. She stared at the manila envelope as if it were a glowing life raft floating in the middle of a dark, freezing ocean. Her hands trembled as she opened the flap and pulled out the legal documents. She quickly scanned the pages, her eyes darting back and forth, reading the clauses that would completely erase her monumental mistake. "There is a luxury pen right next to your hand," I offered smoothly, leaning back in my leather chair. "Sign the bottom line and leave this office forever." Chloe did not hesitate for a single second. She snatched the heavy gold pen and scribbled her signature violently across the bottom of the final page. She dropped the pen and ran out of my office without another word. Exactly 48 hours after saying I do, my brother Jamal was officially wifeless. Exactly 48 hours after saying I do, my brother Jamal was officially wifeless. I folded the annulment papers, slipped them into a fresh envelope, and handed them to my legal team. The rest of my workday was incredibly productive and calm. I closed a minor deal and drove back to my luxury high-rise apartment in Midtown Atlanta. The evening was peaceful until 9 o'clock. A violent pounding echoed through my spacious living room. Someone was aggressively hammering their fists against my front door. I checked the secure video intercom panel mounted on my wall. It was Jamal. His custom linen wedding suit was severely wrinkled and horribly stained. He was heavily sweating and dragging two massive suitcases behind him. I pressed the intercom button, asking what he wanted. "Open the door, Kendra," he yelled into the camera, his voice cracking. "They kicked me out of the hotel. My credit cards are frozen. Chloe will not answer my calls and her parents threatened to call the police. I have nowhere else to go. Let me inside right now." I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open just enough to stand in the frame. Jamal tried to push past me, but I held my ground, blocking his path. "You cannot stay here, Jamal," I stated firmly. He dropped his heavy suitcases onto the polished floor and let out a loud sigh. "Are you seriously going to do this to your own flesh and blood?" he demanded. "I am your older brother, Kendra. We are blood family. You owe it to me to help me out of this mess. You have a massive apartment with empty guest bedrooms. You have millions in corporate accounts. It is your duty to step up and fix this disaster. This is the black tax, Kendra. When one of us makes it to the top, we pull the rest of the family up. You owe your success to the foundation our mother built for you. She is sitting in a freezing federal holding cell right now because she was trying to help me build a better life. You need to hire a defense attorney to bail her out and wire money into my checking account so I can get a hotel room. You owe us." I stared at him, letting his ridiculous monologue hang in the quiet hallway. He truly believed his own lies. He honestly believed my relentless hard work was a collective family asset he was legally entitled to drain. "You think I owe you, Jamal?" I asked softly. "You think I owe the woman who stole my corporate funds and the brother who happily spent them? You think family loyalty means I should blindly finance your crimes and your fake lifestyle?" Jamal rolled his eyes, leaning against the doorframe. "Yes, Kendra. That is exactly what family does," he snapped. "Mom sacrificed everything for us. She risked her freedom just to make sure I had a proper wedding. The least you can do is protect her now. She did this for me, and you are just going to let her rot in jail. Help your own family." I did not argue with his deeply twisted logic. I simply reached into the pocket of my pants and pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the screen, opening a specific voice memo file. Earlier today, when I was at the federal field office giving my witness statement, Agent Miller let me listen to a specific piece of audio evidence. I held the phone up to Jamal's face and pressed play. The recording echoed clearly down the hallway. It was Jamal's own panicked voice screaming at the federal agents. It was her. I had absolutely nothing to do with it. She did it all. She went to the bank by herself. She signed the papers. I swear to God, I thought she had savings. She lied to me. She is the criminal, not me. Take her. Take her away. I stopped the recording and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Jamal turned completely pale. His jaw dropped open and he lost his ability to speak. "You are a coward, Jamal," I said, staring at him with pure disgust. "You spent her stolen money, but you threw your devoted mother right under the federal bus to save your own skin. Do not stand in my hallway preaching about family loyalty when you do not know the meaning of the words. You are just a parasite who finally ran out of hosts." I grabbed the brass handle of my front door. "Where am I supposed to sleep tonight?" he panicked. "You still have the keys to your Mercedes-Benz," I replied smoothly. "The back seat is quite spacious. Consider it your new honeymoon suite. Enjoy the black tax, Jamal. Enjoy the black tax, Jamal." I slammed the heavy front door right in his face and locked the deadbolt. I did not feel sorry for him. I walked straight to my bedroom, turned off my phone, and slept incredibly well. By Sunday morning, news of my mother's arrest and Jamal's downfall had saturated our tight-knit community. Church gossip spreads faster than a raging wildfire. I woke up early, took a shower, and dressed with meticulous care. I chose a tailored emerald green suit paired with my diamond earrings. I was not going to hide in my apartment like a victim. I was going to walk right into the center of the storm. When I pulled my luxury SUV into the crowded church parking lot, I could actually feel the heavy stares piercing through my tinted windows. I stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting my blazer, and walked up the concrete steps with my head held high. The bustling church lobby suddenly went entirely quiet the moment I pushed through the heavy wooden double doors. The silence was deafening. I walked down the center aisle, my high heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. I took my usual seat in the third row, perfectly composed. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the church aunties clustered together in the nearby pews. These were the exact same women who had spent my entire childhood praising Jamal for simply breathing while constantly criticizing me for being too career-focused. They used to tell my mother that my ambition would keep me single, and that I needed to be more nurturing like my brother. Now those same aunties were staring at me with wide, shocked eyes, frantically whispering behind their floral church fans. They knew the golden boy was currently sleeping in a freezing car, and the devoted mother was sitting in a federal holding cell, wearing an orange jumpsuit. None of them dared to make eye contact with me. They simply continued their frantic, hushed conversations, exchanging all the scandalous details they had gathered over the weekend. The choir sang their hymns and the service proceeded, but the tension in the sanctuary was incredibly thick. When it was time for the announcements, Pastor Thomas stepped up to the wooden podium. He adjusted his microphone and cleared his throat, looking directly down at me in the third row. "Sister Kendra," he began, his deep voice echoing loudly through the massive sound system. "We all know that your family is going through a very dark and troubled time this week. The devil is working hard to tear your home apart. But as believers, we are called to show boundless grace. I am asking you right now, in front of our loving congregation, to find it in your heart to forgive your mother. Drop these devastating charges and bring your family back together for the sake of our community image. Do not let secular money destroy a sacred blood bond." The entire congregation gasped collectively, turning their heads to look at me. Pastor Thomas actually expected me to bow my head, cry, and agree to save my abusers just to protect the fragile reputation of his church. He was trying to publicly shame me into submission, using religion as a weapon. I did not bow my head. I did not shed a single tear. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my emerald green suit. I looked directly up at the pastor, my expression completely unbothered. "Pastor Thomas." I projected my voice so clearly that I did not even need a microphone to reach the back rows. "Forgiveness is between my mother and her creator, but accountability is between my mother and the federal government. You are standing at that pulpit, asking me to enable a massive financial crime, to protect an image that was always completely fake. My mother stole corporate funds. My brother happily spent them. Where was your sermon about grace when they were robbing me blind to fund a luxury wedding? You want me to be a human shield for toxic behavior just because we share the same bloodline. I refuse to set myself on fire simply to keep abusive people warm. I am entirely done paying the emotional and financial toll for this family. You can pray for them all you want, but I am not dropping a single charge." I picked up my leather designer purse, stepped out of the wooden pew, and turned my back on the podium. I walked straight down the center aisle, the clicking of my heels the only sound echoing in the completely stunned sanctuary. Not a single person tried to stop me as I pushed the heavy wooden doors open and walked out into the bright morning sun. Not a single person tried to stop me as I walked out into the bright morning sun. I climbed into my luxury SUV and drove away from the toxic community that had enabled my family for decades. I spent the next few days focused on my commercial real estate firm. I finalized details with my client, assuring them the escrow funds would be restituted. My attorneys handled communications with federal authorities, insulating my business from the criminal investigation. While I was closing commercial deals, my brother was experiencing the brutal reality of the American justice system. Jamal had spent 5 days sleeping in the cramped back seat of his depreciating Mercedes. Without my mother to coddle him and my bank account to fund his delusions, he was spiraling into despair. On Thursday afternoon, a government vehicle pulled up next to his car in a dingy parking lot. Two federal agents stepped out and knocked firmly on his tinted window. They handed him a heavy manila envelope. It was a formal grand jury subpoena. Jamal ripped it open with trembling hands. The legal document explicitly named him as a material witness and a primary person of interest in an ongoing federal money laundering investigation. He read the thick packet of papers and his stomach violently dropped. The federal prosecutors were not just going after our mother for stealing the corporate funds. They were meticulously tracking exactly where every single stolen dollar had gone. Because Jamal had knowingly signed the contracts for the luxury wedding vendors, the caterers, the florists, the six-star hotel suites, the government considered him a direct beneficiary of the stolen money. Under federal law, receiving and spending funds obtained through wire fraud made him an accessory to money laundering. The government was officially holding him jointly responsible for the massive financial deficit. The realization hit him like a freight train. He was entirely broke and suddenly facing an insurmountable mountain of federal debt. My phone buzzed loudly on my mahogany desk just as I was signing a new commercial lease agreement. The caller ID flashed Jamal's name. I normally ignored his desperate calls, but today I decided to answer. I pressed the speakerphone button and leaned back in my leather chair. Before I could even say a single word, the sound of loud, uncontrollable sobbing filled my quiet office. "Kendra, please, you have to help me," Jamal wept, his voice completely breaking. The tough guy act he always wore was entirely gone. He sounded like a terrified little boy. "They found me, Kendra. The FBI found me sleeping in my car, and they served me with a subpoena. They are dragging me in front of a federal grand jury next week. I do not have a lawyer. I do not have a single dollar to my name. They are saying I am an accessory to money laundering because Mom used the stolen money to pay for the wedding venue and the catering. They are telling me I have to pay it all back, or I am going to prison too. Please, Kendra, I am begging you on my hands and knees. Call your corporate lawyers. Tell them to represent me. You are my sister and I am so scared." I listened to his frantic gasping breaths and his pathetic pleas for mercy. For my entire life I had been conditioned to jump into action the moment Jamal shed a single tear. Our mother had trained me to sacrifice my own peace of mind to fix his endless mistakes. But as I sat in my corner office looking out over the beautiful Atlanta skyline, I felt absolutely nothing for the weeping man on the speakerphone. I did not feel pity. I did not feel an ounce of familial obligation. I picked up a luxury pen and casually twirled it between my fingers. "I am not calling my lawyers, Jamal," I replied, my voice completely flat and devoid of any sympathy. "My legal team represents my commercial real estate firm, not federal criminals. You spent your entire life demanding the best of everything while forcing me to foot the bill. You wanted to look like a wealthy billionaire in front of a gold-digging woman. You wanted to show off for people who do not even care about you. Well, congratulations on achieving your lifelong dream. You got exactly what you asked for." I leaned closer to the phone, letting my final words sink deep into his shattered reality. "You wanted a $100,000 wedding, Jamal. Now you have a $100,000 debt to the United States government. Have fun paying that off from a prison cell." I ended the call and smoothly placed the cold phone face down on my massive desk without a second thought. I ended the call and smoothly placed the cold phone face down on my massive desk without a second thought. My brother was officially drowning in the deep consequences of his own reckless actions, and I refused to throw him a life preserver. Exactly 2 days later, my receptionist handed me a formal message from the county detention center. It was an urgent visitation request from my mother. The federal authorities were currently holding her there while she awaited her preliminary hearings. I initially considered throwing the request directly into my shredder, but a small part of me wanted to see the final result of her extreme arrogance. I wanted to look her in the eyes now that the luxurious illusion had been entirely stripped away. I cleared my afternoon schedule, drove across town, and walked through the heavy security doors of the detention facility. The visitor room was a stark contrast to the sparkling chandeliers of the Ritz-Carlton. It was a bleak, depressing space filled with gray cinder-block walls, harsh fluorescent lighting, and rows of bolted metal tables. I sat down at an empty table and waited patiently. A heavy steel door buzzed loudly and opened. A female guard escorted my mother into the room. For a brief second, I almost did not recognize the woman shuffling toward me. The proud, demanding matriarch who always wore tailored silk dresses and expensive jewelry was completely gone. Brenda was wearing a faded, oversized orange jumpsuit that swallowed her shrinking frame. Her expensive custom wig had been confiscated, leaving her natural thinning gray hair exposed to the harsh light. She wore absolutely no makeup. Without her heavy foundation and dark lipstick, she looked incredibly pale, tired, and at least 10 years older than her actual age. Her wrists were shackled together, resting heavily against her waist. She slowly sat down across from me on the metal stool. For a long moment, neither of us said a single word. She just stared down at her handcuffed wrists, her shoulders slumped in total defeat. The unbreakable arrogance that had defined her entire existence was finally shattered into a million sharp pieces. "Kendra," she whispered, her voice trembling and incredibly weak. "Thank you for coming. I did not think you would actually show up." I folded my hands neatly on top of the cold metal table. "I am a very busy woman, Mother," I replied, my tone polite but entirely devoid of any warmth. "State your business clearly. I have a commercial property showing in exactly 1 hour." Brenda let out a pathetic, choking sob. She raised her shackled hands and wiped a stray tear from her wrinkled cheek. The reality of her severe situation had completely crushed her spirit. "My public defender came to see me yesterday," she began, her voice cracking with raw terror. "He told me the federal prosecutors are absolutely not backing down because the amount stolen was over $100,000 and it involved corporate escrow funds. They are pushing for the maximum penalty. They want to make a harsh example out of me. He said I could face up to 10 years in a federal penitentiary." I stared at her without blinking. 10 years is the standard sentencing guideline for massive financial fraud, I stated factually. "You should have researched the federal penalties before you walked into that bank branch with a forged legal document." Brenda leaned forward, pressing her chest against the cold metal table. Her eyes were wide and frantic with desperation. "I will die in there, Kendra," she pleaded, crying openly now. "I am 58 years old. I have high blood pressure and bad joints. I cannot survive a decade in a federal prison cell. Please, you have to save me. You are the only person who can stop this nightmare. I know the billionaire client respects you. I know you saved their real estate deal. Please talk to their chief executive officer. Beg them to accept a plea deal for leniency. Ask them to drop the heavy corporate pressure on the prosecutors so I can just get probation or house arrest. I will do anything you want. I will apologize to you every single day for the rest of my life. Just please do not let me die behind bars." I listened to her desperate begging, letting her words echo in the sterile room. She was entirely at my mercy. I looked at the woman who had happily stolen my livelihood, and I made a calculated decision. "I will speak to my client." I finally said, my voice calm and completely steady. "I will ask them to accept a lenient plea deal, but I have a strict contract of my very own." I slid a manila envelope across the metal table now. The thick yellow envelope made a harsh scraping sound against the steel surface as I pushed it toward her shackled hands. Brenda stared at it as if it were a live grenade. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling with fresh panic. I kept my posture perfectly straight and my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "Inside that envelope is a legally binding contract," I explained smoothly. "It is a quitclaim deed prepared by my real estate attorneys. It transfers the complete legal ownership of the family home directly to my name. You own the house outright, since I paid off the mortgage balance 2 years ago. I will immediately sell the property and use the proceeds to restitute the $125,000 you stole from my corporate client. I will also use the remaining funds to cover the extensive legal fees incurred by my firm to clean up your massive financial disaster. If you sign that document right now, I will personally call the Chief Executive Officer of the Billionaire Investment Group. I will ask them to submit a formal letter of leniency to the federal judge handling your case. If you do not sign it, I will stand up, walk out of this dreary room, and let you rot in a federal penitentiary for the next 10 years. Brenda recoiled from the table as if the envelope had physically burned her. The remaining color drained completely from her pale face. "You want my house?" she gasped, clutching her chest in absolute horror. "You want the only thing I have left in this world. You cannot do this, Kendra. That house is our family legacy. I worked hard to maintain that home for decades. It is Jamal's inheritance. I promised him that property would be his one day so he could raise his future children there. You cannot just steal your brother's inheritance." I let out a genuinely amused laugh that echoed loudly off the cold cinder-block walls. The guard standing by the door shifted his weight but said nothing. "Jamal's inheritance," I repeated, shaking my head at her breathtaking delusion. "Mother, you really have not grasped the absolute severity of the situation you created. Jamal does not have an inheritance. Jamal does not even have a wife anymore." Chloe signed annulment papers 48 hours after the wedding because she realized he was completely broke. Right now, your precious golden boy is currently living inside his depreciating car. He has spent the last 5 nights sleeping in the cramped back seat of his vehicle in a dingy parking lot because nobody will take him in. And even if you miraculously kept that house, Jamal could never afford to pay the property taxes on it. He was served with a federal grand jury subpoena yesterday afternoon. The government is officially holding him accountable as an accessory to money laundering because he signed the vendor contracts using your stolen funds. He currently owes the United States government $100,000. If you try to give him that house, the federal authorities will immediately seize it to pay off his massive criminal debt. You have absolutely no legacy left to protect. Brenda began to hyperventilate again. Her chest heaved rapidly as the crushing weight of reality finally broke through her walls of denial. She looked around the bleak visitation room, searching for any possible escape route, but there was only cold steel and concrete. The fantasy of the wealthy, perfectly successful Washington family was completely dead, and she was the one who had finally killed it. I pulled a heavy silver pen from my designer blazer pocket and placed it deliberately on top of the manila envelope. "You have exactly 30 seconds to make your choice, Mother," I stated coldly, checking my luxury watch. "Choose the house or choose 10 years in federal prison. It is entirely up to you." Tears streamed continuously down her deeply wrinkled cheeks. Her hands shook violently as she reached for the silver pen. The metal handcuffs clinked loudly against the table as she awkwardly pulled the legal document from the envelope. She did not bother reading the clauses. She just frantically scribbled her signature across the bottom line, officially signing away the last remaining piece of her precious pride. She dropped the pen and pushed the document back toward me. "You are a monster," she sobbed bitterly, burying her face in her hands. "You are a cold, heartless monster for doing this to your own family." I smoothly picked up the signed deed, sliding it back into the thick envelope. I stood up, adjusting my tailored blazer. "I am not a monster, Mother," I replied, looking down at her broken form. "I am the bank, and your account is permanently closed." I walked out of the bleak visitation room without looking back. The steel doors buzzed and clicked shut, sealing her fate and securing my future. I drove straight from the detention facility to my real estate attorney's office. We filed the quitclaim deed with the county clerk that exact afternoon, expediting the legal transfer of ownership. By Friday morning, the sprawling brick colonial home where I had spent my childhood, being treated like a second-class citizen, officially belonged to me. I scheduled a professional locksmith to change every lock on the property for the following Monday. However, I severely underestimated the sheer reckless desperation of a ruined golden child. Jamal had somehow received word, through a gossiping aunt, that our mother had signed away his precious inheritance to save herself from a maximum prison sentence. Having spent nearly a week sleeping upright in the freezing back seat of his depreciating car, Jamal decided to take drastic action. On Saturday evening, he drove to the family home, parked boldly in the driveway, and used a garden rock to smash the glass pane of the back patio door. He let himself inside, raided the kitchen pantry, and sprawled out on the expensive leather sofa in the living room. He genuinely believed that if he physically occupied the space, family loyalty or squatter rights would magically protect him from reality. He forgot that I had installed a smart home security system for our mother 2 years ago, personally paying the monthly subscription from my corporate accounts. The exact moment the patio glass shattered, an alert popped up on my smartphone. The interior cameras clearly showed Jamal walking through the kitchen eating food, as if he still owned the world. I did not drive over there to argue with him. I did not call him to demand he leave the premises. I simply picked up a manila folder containing the freshly stamped property deed and drove directly to the sheriff's precinct. When I explained the situation and provided the certified legal documentation proving I was the sole lawful owner of the property, the officers were more than happy to assist with an immediate removal of an active intruder. I pulled into my newly acquired driveway, flanked closely by two sheriff cruisers. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the manicured lawn, drawing the immediate attention of the wealthy suburban neighbors. I unlocked the heavy front door with my master key and stepped into the grand foyer with two armed deputies walking right behind me. Jamal was casually walking down the carpeted stairs, wearing one of his expensive silk robes and holding a large glass of our mother's vintage red wine. When he saw the uniformed police officers standing in the hallway, his smug expression evaporated instantly. "What is going on here?" he demanded loudly, trying desperately to maintain his fake authority. "Officers, tell my sister to leave my property right now. She is trespassing in my family home." The lead deputy stepped forward, resting his hand casually on his duty belt. "Sir, you need to place the glass on the table and put your hands behind your back," the deputy instructed firmly. Jamal laughed, a sharp, nervous sound echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "Put my hands behind my back," he scoffed, taking a defensive step up the wooden stairs. "You cannot arrest me in my own house. I live here. This is my inheritance. My mother gave this beautiful house to me." I stepped out from behind the tall officers, holding up the crisp white legal document with the bright blue county seal. "Your mother gave this house to the bank, Jamal." I corrected him, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "And I am the bank. You are currently breaking and entering into a privately owned property." The realization finally hit him. He dropped the wine glass, shattering it into tiny pieces across the hardwood floor. Red wine bled into the expensive rug, but I did not care. It was a small price to pay for this glorious moment. The deputies moved swiftly, ascending the stairs and grabbing his arms. Jamal began to thrash and scream, fighting wildly against their strong grip, but he was completely overpowered. They slammed him forcefully against the wall, clicking heavy steel handcuffs tightly around his wrists. He began to cry loudly, sobbing exactly like a toddler as they dragged him down the stairs and out the front door. I followed them out onto the porch, watching as several neighbors stood on their lawns, holding up their glowing smartphones. They were recording every single humiliating second as the once arrogant golden boy was shoved violently into the back of a police cruiser, crying hysterically in his silk robe, while the flashing police lights illuminated his absolute pathetic downfall. I watched the flashing police cruiser disappear down the street, taking my family's fake legacy with them. The wealthy neighborhood grew quiet again. I locked the front door and drove back to the city. I had a very important meeting the following morning, and I needed to be perfectly prepared. At 9 o'clock sharp, I walked into the massive glass boardroom of the international investment firm. The chief executive officer, Mr. Sterling, was sitting at the head of the long mahogany table. He was a ruthless businessman who did not tolerate excuses or financial errors. His legal team sat beside him, looking incredibly stern. They fully expected me to walk in and beg for an extension or offer a complicated apology regarding the stolen escrow funds. Instead, I walked straight to the table and placed a single certified bank check right in front of Mr. Sterling. The check was made out for exactly $125,000. I had secured a rapid commercial loan against the equity of the massive colonial house I now legally owned. "Where did this come from?" Mr. Sterling asked, looking down at the heavy paper. "That is the full restitution of your corporate escrow deposit," I stated, clearly, taking my seat across from him. "The funds are entirely cleared and immediately available for your high-rise development project. The legal issue regarding the unauthorized withdrawal has been completely neutralized. My personal real estate firm has absorbed the entire financial blow, so your investments remain perfectly secure." The massive room fell completely silent. The high-powered corporate lawyers looked at each other in absolute shock. They were entirely prepared for a massive legal battle and a lengthy federal recovery process. Mr. Sterling picked up the certified check and examined it closely. He looked up at me, his sharp eyes analyzing my perfectly calm demeanor. "You used your own personal assets to cover a massive felony committed by your own mother," he stated flatly. "You liquidated property to ensure my firm did not lose a single penny, and you did it in less than 1 week." I kept my posture completely straight and my expression neutral. "Integrity is the foundation of my commercial real estate firm," I replied smoothly. "When my business is entrusted with corporate capital, I guarantee its absolute safety, regardless of who attempts to compromise it. You hired me to execute a major commercial deal, and I always deliver exactly what I promise." Mr. Sterling slowly set the certified check down on the polished mahogany table. A very rare and genuine smile crossed his usually stern face. He leaned back in his heavy leather executive chair and steepled his fingers together. "In my 30 years of cutthroat corporate real estate, I have never seen anyone handle a massive financial crisis with such ruthless efficiency," he admitted, his voice echoing in the large glass room. "Most brokers would have immediately filed for bankruptcy or blamed the federal authorities for the delay. You completely severed your own toxic family to protect my investment. That level of absolute loyalty and cold calculation is incredibly rare in this modern industry." He turned to his lead corporate attorney and nodded once. The lawyer immediately opened a thick leather briefcase and pulled out a fresh stack of legal documents, sliding them across the table toward me. I looked down at the crisp white pages. "What is this?" I asked, maintaining my professional composure. "Those are 3 exclusive commercial brokerage contracts," Mr. Sterling explained, leaning forward again. "We are expanding our corporate footprint across the entire East Coast next year. We need an aggressive lead broker who does not let emotions or personal liabilities interfere with massive financial operations. We originally planned to distribute these massive development projects among 3 different international firms." He continued, his tone completely serious. "But I want your firm to handle all of them exclusively. The combined commission on these 3 commercial buildings will easily exceed $4 million. I stared down at the massive corporate contracts resting on the polished table. A profound sense of absolute victory washed over me. My mother and my brother had stolen my money because they believed I was just a weak stepping stone for their own selfish desires. They thought draining my accounts would force me into submission and ruin my professional reputation forever. They actively tried to destroy my entire life just to fund a single weekend of fake luxury and absolute lies. But their extreme greed had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. By attempting to completely bankrupt me and ruin my corporate standing, they had accidentally handed me the greatest professional opportunity of my entire life. By trying to destroy my entire existence, my toxic family had accidentally made me a multimillionaire. 3 months later, the swift wheels of the federal justice system finally brought my mother to her formal sentencing hearing. The crisp autumn wind whipped around the towering stone pillars of the federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta as I walked up the wide concrete steps. I wore a sharp-tailored charcoal suit and carried a sleek leather briefcase, feeling completely in control of my destiny. Inside the massive courtroom, the heavy oak benches were polished, and the atmosphere was incredibly solemn. I took a seat in the back row of the gallery, crossing my legs and resting my hands in my lap. A few moments later, the side doors opened, and the bailiff escorted my mother into the room. Brenda was no longer wearing the bright orange jumpsuit from the county jail, but her appearance was still a drastic departure from her former glory. She wore a plain, drab beige blouse and ill-fitting black slacks. Her posture was completely broken. She walked with a slow, heavy shuffle, her shoulders slumped forward in total defeat. She stood quietly beside her public defender, gripping the edge of the heavy wooden defense table as the federal judge entered the room and took his seat high upon the bench. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at the extensive file resting before him. He did not look sympathetic. Brenda Washington. He began, his deep voice echoing powerfully through the silent courtroom. You stand before this federal court having pled guilty to felony wire fraud. You deliberately exploited an outdated medical proxy to unlawfully drain a corporate escrow account of $125,000. Under normal circumstances, a financial crime of this massive magnitude would guarantee you a lengthy stay in a federal penitentiary. The maximum penalty for this specific offense is 20 years. My mother visibly trembled, gripping the wooden table so tightly her knuckles turned completely white. However, the judge continued, flipping a page in his heavy file. The court recognizes that full financial restitution has been made to the corporate victim. The stolen funds were entirely repaid by a third party, mitigating the massive financial damage caused by your reckless criminal actions. Because the restitution was paid in full before this hearing, the prosecution has formally agreed to a highly structured plea deal. The judge leaned forward, peering sternly over his glasses directly at my trembling mother. You are incredibly fortunate that someone stepped in to clean up your massive disaster, he stated coldly. Because of that restitution, I am suspending your physical prison sentence. Instead, I am sentencing you to 5 years of strict supervised federal probation. Brenda let out a loud, gasping breath of pure relief, sagging against her public defender. But her relief was incredibly short-lived. The judge raised his hand, silencing her instantly. Do not celebrate yet, Mrs. Washington, he warned sharply. This probation comes with severe, unyielding conditions. You are now a convicted federal felon. For the rest of your natural life, you are legally barred from opening or maintaining any line of credit. You will never hold a major credit card again. You must surrender your passport immediately, and you are legally prohibited from traveling outside the state of Georgia without explicit written permission from a federal probation officer. Furthermore, you are permanently banned from holding any financial power of attorney or managing the financial assets of any other human being. If you violate a single condition of this strict probation, you will be immediately arrested and you will serve the full 10-year sentence behind federal bars. Do you completely understand these terms? Yes, Your Honor, my mother whispered, her voice cracking pathetically as the heavy reality of her ruined life finally sank in. She had avoided a physical prison cell, but she was now trapped in a permanent, invisible cage. She had lost her social status, her financial freedom, and her luxurious lifestyle forever. The judge struck his heavy wooden gavel against the sounding block, officially cementing her permanent downfall. The loud crack echoed through the massive courtroom, signaling the absolute end of the Washington family illusion. As the bailiff moved forward to process her release paperwork, Brenda slowly turned her head and looked back toward the wooden gallery benches. Her desperate eyes scanned the empty rows, searching frantically for the golden child she had sacrificed absolutely everything to protect. She looked for Jamal, hoping he had somehow found the basic human decency to show up and support the mother who had ruined her own life for his fake wedding. But the wooden benches were completely empty. Jamal simply did not show up. He did not care enough to attend. The only person sitting in that massive gallery was me. I sat perfectly still, my expression completely unbothered. The only person sitting in that massive gallery was me. I sat perfectly still, my expression completely unbothered. I watched the bailiff lead my mother through the heavy side door and out of my life for good. As I walked out of the federal courthouse, I knew the final chapter of this toxic saga was not quite finished. News of my mother's severe probation and Jamal's financial ruin spread through our family network faster than a virus. By the weekend, the shifting dynamics were incredibly obvious. For years, my aunts and uncles had completely ignored my achievements. They had enabled my mother's blatant favoritism and praised my brother for simply existing. But now the golden goose was locked in an invisible cage, and the golden boy was living on the streets. Suddenly, my personal phone was ringing constantly. The same church aunties who had loudly gossiped about me months ago were now leaving sweet voicemails, calling me the true pride of the Washington family. They realized I was the only person left with actual wealth or social influence. The ultimate test of their newfound loyalty came in the form of a brightly colored text message inviting me to the annual family fall cookout at my Uncle Richard's house. Historically, I was only invited to these large gatherings, so I could foot the bill for the expensive catering and premium liquor while being forced to sit silently at the far end of the table. I had ignored their calls all week, but I decided to attend this specific event. I did not go to reconnect or share a plate of barbecue ribs. I went to deliver a final message. When I pulled my luxury SUV up to the curb outside my uncle's house, the loud music playing in the backyard suddenly seemed to lower in volume. I walked through the wooden side gate wearing a casual but clearly expensive designer outfit, holding a thick manila folder tightly in my right hand. The moment I stepped onto the freshly cut grass, the entire atmosphere shifted. My Aunt Martha, who had once told me my business degree was a total waste of time, practically ran across the yard to greet me. She was holding a plastic cup of sweet tea and wearing a giant, fake smile. "Oh, Kendra, baby, we are all so incredibly happy you decided to come," she gushed, trying to pull me into a tight, uncomfortable hug. I took a deliberate step back, refusing the physical contact entirely. Martha awkwardly dropped her arms, but maintained her bright, plastic smile. "We have all been talking about how incredibly strong you are," Martha continued, pitching her voice loudly so the rest of the family could hear every word. "You handled that terrible situation with your mother so professionally. We always knew you were the smart one. You are the true matriarch of this family now, Kendra. We are all looking to you for leadership and guidance." Several other relatives nodded in eager agreement, stepping closer to form a tight circle around me. They looked at me with hungry, expectant eyes. They were already calculating how my multi-million-dollar commercial real estate contracts could benefit them directly. They wanted me to step right into my mother's shoes and become their brand new personal automated teller machine. I looked around the yard at the faces of the people who had actively watched my mother abuse me for 3 entire decades. You all knew I stated my voice cutting cleanly through the thick smell of charcoal and roasted meat. You knew she was stealing from me to fund Jamal's fake luxury lifestyle. You knew he was an unemployed fraud. You sat at every single holiday dinner and watched them tear me down just to build him up. You never once defended me. You cheered for the criminals and ostracized the victim. And now that the federal government has completely bankrupted them both, you think you can just smile and transfer your parasitic attachment directly onto my bank accounts. Aunt Martha gasped loudly, clutching her fake pearls in mock offense. "Kendra, how can you say such cruel things?" she stammered, her face flushing red. "We are your blood family. We are just trying to support you during this hard time." I did not let her finish her pathetic excuse. I walked straight past her toward the main buffet table. I bypassed the large trays of potato salad and grilled chicken. I took the thick manila folder I had been carrying and dropped it flat onto the center of the picnic table with a loud, heavy smack. Inside that folder are the financial receipts of every single dollar I have spent supporting this ungrateful family, I announced very loudly. The Bank of Kendra is now permanently shut. The Bank of Kendra is now permanently shut. I turned on my heel and walked right out of my uncle's backyard, leaving the manila folder sitting dead center on the picnic table. The silence that followed me to my vehicle was the sweetest music I had ever heard. I climbed into my SUV and drove away, knowing I had successfully amputated the diseased branches of my family tree. I thought the drama was completely finished, but parasites always look for a new host when they are desperate. Exactly 2 weeks after I crashed the family cookout, I encountered the ghost of my brother's ruined wedding. I was walking out of my favorite high-end coffee shop in Midtown Atlanta, holding my iced latte, when someone frantically called my name. I turned around and saw Chloe. My former sister-in-law looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant bride who had once called me tacky. Her designer clothes looked slightly unkempt, and the supreme confidence she used to carry was entirely gone. She practically ran up to me, forcing a desperately bright smile onto her face. "Kendra," she gasped, acting as if we were long-lost best friends. "I am so incredibly glad I ran into you. I have been trying to figure out how to reach you for days." I took a slow sip of my coffee, remaining perfectly silent. Chloe shifted awkwardly but pushed forward with her rehearsed speech. "I just wanted to apologize for how everything went down at the hotel." She continued, placing a hand on her chest. "Jamal completely deceived both of us. We are both independent, successful women who were manipulated by his horrible lies. I realized we actually have so much in common. We were both victims of his toxic behavior. We should stick together and support each other through this trauma." I let her speak, knowing exactly where this sudden sisterhood was heading. It took less than 3 minutes for her to reveal her true motive. "You know, Kendra, since my annulment, my parents cut off my allowance to teach me a lesson about bad investments," she sighed, looking down at the sidewalk. "I am trying to start over, but I just need a tiny bit of seed money to secure a new luxury apartment. Just a temporary loan of $20,000. You are doing so well with your commercial real estate, and I promise I will pay you back the second I get on my feet." I actually laughed out loud. The sound echoed off the brick buildings of the busy street, causing a few pedestrians to turn and look at us. Chloe looked confused, her fake smile faltering. "You think we are the same?" I asked, my voice dripping with pure amusement. "You think because my brother lied about his bank account that we are suddenly bonded by trauma? Chloe, you were never a victim. You were a willing participant in his delusion until the funds dried up. And you are certainly not my sister." I reached into my designer tote bag and pulled out my smartphone. When my attorneys filed the annulment paperwork, they formally subpoenaed Jamal's phone records to prove the timeline of the financial fraud, I explained, casually swiping across my screen. "That legal discovery process accidentally captured dozens of text messages you sent to Jamal during your brief engagement. Messages you thought would stay completely private." I held the bright screen right up to her face. "Let me read my absolute favorite one," I offered loudly. "I cannot believe I have to deal with your ghetto sister at the wedding. She acts so arrogant for someone who just got lucky in real estate. At least her money is paying for my floral arrangements, so her existence is not totally useless." Chloe's face turned an alarming shade of pale gray. She took a stumbling step backward, looking around frantically to see if anyone else on the busy sidewalk had heard me. I did not lower my voice. "You never respected me, Chloe," I continued, stepping toward her. "You used racist stereotypes to degrade my success, while happily spending my hard-earned money to fund your pathetic social climbing fantasies. You are not a victim. You are just a parasite who bet on the wrong horse. You wanted to marry into wealth, but you ended up marrying a federal crime. Do not ever approach me on the street again, or I will publish every single text message you sent about my family on every social media platform you use." Chloe was completely paralyzed by absolute humiliation. Several people sitting at the outdoor cafe tables were openly staring at her, whispering and pointing. She pulled her designer sunglasses down over her eyes, turned around, and practically sprinted down the street. Chloe was completely paralyzed by absolute humiliation. Several people sitting at the outdoor cafe tables were openly staring at her, whispering and pointing. She pulled her designer sunglasses down over her eyes, turned around, and practically sprinted down the street. With Chloe gone, I focused on the last physical reminder of my toxic past. The massive brick colonial house was completely empty. I fully secured the property. But simply owning the house was not enough, because the structure itself held terrible memories. It was the house where I was told my ambition was an ugly trait. I did not want to sell it immediately, because the real estate market was currently down, but I absolutely refused to step foot inside it, while it still looked like my childhood prison. I called a premium commercial contracting firm I frequently worked with and ordered a complete interior demolition. When the crew arrived on Monday morning, I met the lead foreman in the driveway. He handed me a bright yellow hard hat and a heavy steel sledgehammer. Before his crew started tearing out the expensive hardwood floors and the custom cabinets, I had one very specific request. I walked into the grand living room where the heavy crystal chandelier still hung from the vaulted ceiling. I stood directly in front of the massive plaster wall, separating the living room from the formal dining area. This was the exact wall where my mother used to line us up for holiday photographs. She always placed Jamal right in the center, illuminated by the best light while actively pushing me toward the dark edges of the frame. She used to stand in this exact room and tell her wealthy friends that Jamal was destined for absolute greatness, while I was just going to be a reliable worker bee. I lifted the heavy sledgehammer, feeling the solid weight of the iron head in my hands. I did not feel any sadness or nostalgia. I swung the hammer forward with all the strength I had built over 32 years of emotional survival. The heavy iron smashed violently into the pristine white plaster. A loud crack echoed through the empty house as a massive hole opened up in the wall, exposing the wooden studs and the dark wiring underneath. White dust plumed into the air, catching the morning sunlight streaming through the large front windows. I swung the hammer again and again, pulverizing the physical foundation of my childhood trauma. With every single swing, the heavy weight I had carried in my chest for decades grew lighter. The contractors stood in the hallway, respectfully silent as I demolished the barrier. Once my arms were completely exhausted, I dropped the sledgehammer onto the floor covered in white dust and let out a long breath. I told the foreman to gut every single room until there was absolutely nothing left of the original floor plan. Over the next 4 months, the house was completely transformed. The dark, stuffy colonial layout was completely erased. The contractors opened up the entire first floor, creating a bright, massive modern living space. The pale blue bedroom where I used to hide from my mother's constant criticism was expanded and converted into a luxurious home office with massive glass windows. We installed sleek hardwood floors, minimalist fixtures, and a state-of-the-art modern kitchen. I took a space that was entirely defined by toxic traditions and suffocating expectations and turned it into a highly desirable modern masterpiece. Because it was located in a premier school district, the property value skyrocketed. I decided to list it as a high-end luxury rental property, adding a massive new stream of passive income to my growing financial portfolio. When the property went on the market, I personally screened every single applicant. I received dozens of offers from wealthy couples who looked exactly like the snobby neighbors I had grown up around, but I rejected all of them. Instead, I chose a woman named Sarah. Sarah was a brilliant single mother of 2 young girls who had just accepted a high-paying executive position at a tech firm downtown. She had recently escaped a terrible marriage and was looking for a beautiful, safe space to completely rebuild her life and provide a strong foundation for her daughters. When I handed Sarah the shiny new keys to the front door, I watched her 2 little girls run happily into the bright open living room. They laughed brightly, spinning around in the exact same space where I was once told I would never be enough. By renting the home to a very strong, independent woman raising 2 ambitious daughters, I completely rewrote the energy of the property. The house of generational trauma was now a house of genuine female empowerment. The house of generational trauma was now a house of genuine female empowerment. 7 months passed, and my life had settled into a beautiful rhythm of massive financial growth and absolute personal peace. I was expanding my commercial real estate firm, taking on 2 new partners, and finalizing the designs for the new high-rise downtown. I no longer woke up with heavy, lingering anxiety, wondering what massive disaster my family had created overnight. I was finally free. On a crisp Tuesday morning, I decided to skip my office espresso machine and take a walk down the street to a popular local cafe. I was wearing a tailored navy blue suit and carrying my leather briefcase, feeling completely aligned with my purpose. The cafe was bustling with young professionals, and the smell of freshly roasted coffee filled the warm air. I stood in line checking my emails when I heard a very familiar voice calling out order numbers from behind the wooden counter. I looked up, and my world briefly paused. There, standing behind the cash register, wearing a bright yellow polo shirt and a matching visor, was my brother Jamal. The contrast between his former arrogant glory and his current stark reality was absolutely staggering. The man who once demanded a luxury honeymoon suite and worn custom linen suits was now wiping down sticky countertops for minimum wage. His posture was completely hunched, his shoulders sagging under the heavy weight of his massive federal debt. The golden child had finally been forced to enter the real world, and it was clearly destroying him. When he turned to hand a customer their receipt, his tired eyes scanned the line and locked directly onto mine. I saw the immediate flash of deep humiliation wash over his sweating face. His jaw went slack, and he physically recoiled, taking a small step back from the register. He looked at my expensive tailored suit and my pristine leather briefcase, and then looked down at his own stained yellow uniform. For a split second, I thought he might just run out the back door to escape the overwhelming shame. But true parasites are entirely driven by their desperate need to survive. He swallowed hard, forced a nervous smile onto his face, and slowly walked out from behind the counter to approach me. "Kendra," he whispered, his voice trembling as he stepped into my personal space. "I cannot believe you are here. It has been so long." I looked at him, but I did not say a single word. I kept my face perfectly neutral, offering him absolutely no emotional reaction. He took my silence as an invitation to continue. "Look, Kendra, I am doing the work now," he pleaded, rubbing his hands together nervously. "I have been working here for 3 months trying to pay off the government, but it is barely enough to survive. I am living in a tiny rented room and eating leftover bagels from the shop. I know I messed up. I know I was stupid and selfish. I am so sorry for everything I did to you. I really am." He paused, looking at my designer watch and my expensive handbag. His eyes gleamed with that familiar, greedy desperation. "I am trying to get a better apartment," he continued, his voice dropping to a pathetic whisper. "But they need a massive security deposit, and my credit is completely ruined. You look like you are doing incredibly well. If you could just front me a couple $1,000s, I promise I will pay you back from my checks. Just a small loan to help your big brother get back on his feet. Please, Kendra." I stared at him, listening to his empty, hollow apology. He was not sorry for what he had done to me. He was only sorry that his actions had resulted in his own suffering. He still looked at me and saw nothing but a walking bank account. I did not yell at him. I did not lecture him about personal responsibility or remind him of the federal crimes he committed. I did not give him the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. I simply stepped around him, walked up to the open cash register, and ordered a large black coffee from his confused coworker. When the total came to $5, I pulled a crisp $100 bill from my wallet. "Keep the change," I told the young barista, my voice completely steady and polite. Jamal watched the transaction with wide, hungry eyes, his mouth opening and closing silently. I took my warm coffee, turned around, and walked right out the heavy front door into the bright morning sunlight. The ultimate insult was not a screaming match or a bitter argument. It was my absolute, utter indifference. The ultimate insult was not a screaming match or a bitter argument. It was my absolute, utter indifference. While Jamal wiped down counters for minimum wage, our mother was discovering the harsh reality of her own new life. Thanksgiving was historically the most important holiday for the Washington family. In the past, Brenda would host massive elaborate dinners at the Colonial House using my credit cards to buy premium organic turkeys and expensive imported wines. She would hold court at the head of the dining table, wearing expensive jewelry and bragging loudly about Jamal's latest imaginary business ventures. This year, however, her holiday looked completely different. Brenda now lived on the outskirts of Atlanta in a tiny one-bedroom subsidized apartment. The massive manicured lawns she was used to were replaced by a cracked concrete parking lot. Instead of a grand foyer, her front door opened directly into a cramped living space that constantly smelled like stale cigarette smoke and cheap cleaning supplies. The walls were paper-thin, allowing her to hear every single argument from her neighbors. The luxury vehicles she used to rent were gone, replaced by a bus pass she kept safely tucked inside her cheap vinyl wallet. Her federal probation terms were incredibly strict and utterly humiliating. She wore a heavy black ankle monitor tightly strapped to her left leg, constantly tracking her exact location. She was required to be inside her tiny apartment every single night by 6 o'clock sharp. If she stepped outside her door even 1 minute past curfew, the device would immediately alert the federal authorities, and she would be sent directly to prison. She could not attend any late evening church services. She could not go out for dinner. She was now completely and permanently trapped inside her incredibly drab and depressing subsidized box. On Thanksgiving morning, Brenda woke up early out of sheer habit, but there was no massive kitchen to prepare a feast. She stood in her narrow galley kitchen and opened a small plastic container of sliced deli turkey and a box of instant mashed potatoes. There were no crystal wine glasses or silver platters. There was only a chipped ceramic plate and a plastic cup filled with tap water. The heavy, cold silence in her apartment was absolutely and utterly deafening. She sat alone at her small, wobbly kitchen table, staring at the depressing meal she had prepared for herself. For the first time in her entire life, she had absolutely no audience. There was no one to manipulate, and no one to impress. The crushing weight of her profound isolation finally settled heavily onto her shoulders. She reached for her prepaid government-issued cell phone. It was a cheap plastic device, a massive downgrade from the latest smartphones I used to buy for her every single year. Her hands shook slightly as she scrolled through her very short list of contacts. She stopped on my name, the daughter she had actively abused, stolen from, and tried to completely ruin, driven by a desperate need for any human connection. She pressed the green call button and lifted the cheap plastic phone to her ear. She listened to it ring once, twice, 3 times. She closed her eyes, hoping I would answer and offer her a tiny shred of forgiveness. But the ringing suddenly stopped, and my very professional automated voicemail greeting played cheerfully instead. Kendra Washington is currently unavailable. Please leave a brief message and I will return your call as soon as possible. She did not leave a message. She slowly lowered the phone and ended the connection. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision. She immediately navigated back to her contact list and tapped on Jamal's name. She desperately needed to hear the voice of her golden boy. She needed the son she had sacrificed her entire freedom to protect. She placed the phone back to her ear, holding her breath. The automated voice of the cellular provider spoke immediately. The number you have reached has been disconnected or is no longer in service. Jamal had not paid his phone bill, and he had not bothered to give his devoted mother his new number. Brenda dropped the cheap phone onto the table next to her cold instant potatoes. A sharp and incredibly painful sob violently ripped through her tight, aching chest. She listened to the beep of the disconnected line echoing in her mind. Sitting alone in her cramped, subsidized apartment wearing a federal ankle monitor, she finally understood the true magnitude of her massive mistake. She realized with absolute horrifying clarity that she had completely traded a fiercely loyal daughter who would have gladly given her the entire world for a selfish, entitled son who would not even bother to answer her calls. While my mother sat alone in her cramped, subsidized apartment, regretting her massive mistakes, my own Thanksgiving was unfolding in a completely different and beautiful universe. I was hosting my very first holiday dinner in my newly renovated luxury penthouse high above the glittering downtown Atlanta skyline. The smell of a roasted organic turkey and fresh savory herbs filled the warm air, mingling seamlessly with the sound of genuine laughter and soft jazz music playing from the surround sound speakers. I did not invite a single person who shared my toxic bloodline. The long, formal mahogany dining table was not filled with entitled, greedy relatives waiting to tear me down or ask for handouts. Instead, it was entirely surrounded by my beautifully chosen family. These were the people who had actively supported my massive professional growth and celebrated my incredible success without a single ounce of hidden toxic jealousy. My business partners, my lead corporate attorney, my closest childhood friends, and the loyal industry mentors who had guided me through my absolute darkest days were all sitting comfortably around my table, enjoying a spectacular holiday feast. There was a profound and truly beautiful difference in the overall atmosphere of this massive room. For 32 years, Thanksgiving had always been an absolute nightmare of dangerous emotional landmines and blatant financial extortion. I used to spend the entire month leading up to the holiday gripped by severe, crippling anxiety, wondering exactly how much money Jamal was going to subtly demand, or what cruel, backhanded compliments my mother would deliberately use to completely humiliate me in front of our judgmental extended relatives. The old family dinners were always filled with loud, aggressive screaming, passive-aggressive shade, and the constant suffocating pressure to perform for people who secretly hated my ambition. But tonight in my own beautiful home, there was absolutely none of that terrible darkness. There was no one demanding my corporate credit card to pay for a fake emergency. There was no one comparing my commercial real estate empire to a fake technology startup. There was no one rolling their eyes when I spoke, or telling me I needed to be more subservient. It was just pure, uninterrupted, glorious peace. I walked out of my massive modern kitchen carrying a heavy silver platter of roasted winter vegetables and placed it gently onto the center of the elegant dining table. The crystal wine glasses sparkled brightly under the modern glass chandelier. Every single person sitting at the table looked up and smiled at me with genuine warmth and deep professional respect. My lead attorney, Sarah, who had brilliantly helped me execute the quitclaim deed to legally take back my childhood family home, reached out and poured a generous amount of expensive imported red wine into my empty glass. She smiled warmly and picked up her own glass, tapping it lightly with her silver spoon to get everyone's immediate attention. The soft, happy chatter in the dining room slowly died down as my chosen family turned their attention to look directly at her. "I want to propose a very important toast tonight," Sarah announced, her clear voice carrying easily through the beautiful dining room. "We are all gathered together here tonight to celebrate so much more than just a highly successful business year. We are here to celebrate the incredible, unyielding strength of the amazing woman sitting at the head of this beautiful table. Kendra, you showed us all what it truly means to fiercely stand up for your own personal worth. You did the absolute hardest thing imaginable by cutting away the deep generational toxicity that was actively trying to pull you under. You chose your own mental peace over a fake family obligation. You chose your own bright future over their massive emotional manipulation. So tonight we raise our glasses to strict boundaries, absolute self-respect, and the beautiful, loving family you have actively chosen to build around you." Every single person at the long table raised their sparkling crystal glass, echoing the beautiful sentiment loud and clear. To boundaries they cheered brightly, taking a long, satisfying sip of the rich red wine. I raised my own glass, taking a slow drink as I looked around the room, taking in the smiling, supportive faces of the people who truly valued my daily existence. I felt a heavy weight lift off my chest forever. I realized something incredibly profound in that quiet, beautiful moment. Society had tried to tell me that walking away from blood relatives meant losing my family. They tried to convince me I would be entirely alone and miserable, but looking at the genuine love filling my dining room, I finally understood the absolute truth. I did not lose a family at all, I had simply escaped a cult. Escaping that cult was the ultimate catalyst for my professional explosion. Without the constant, massive financial drain of my mother and brother dragging me down, my commercial real estate firm expanded at an unprecedented rate. 2 years after that peaceful Thanksgiving dinner, I stood on the polished steps of a massive glass and steel high-rise in the heart of the downtown financial district. It was a crisp, bright Tuesday morning, and I was holding a pair of oversized golden scissors. A massive crowd of industry leaders, local politicians, and my fiercely loyal team members stood gathered around the entrance. I was not just closing a deal today. I was officially cutting the red ribbon on the brand new corporate headquarters of my own brokerage firm. The cameras flashed brilliantly as the ribbon fell to the polished concrete floor. The applause was deafening and genuine. I smiled warmly, shaking hands with the city mayor and my billionaire investment clients who had flown in for this grand opening. Walking through the massive glass double doors into the expansive modern lobby felt like stepping into a brand new universe. The walls were lined with sleek digital displays showcasing our multi-million-dollar commercial acquisitions across the entire East Coast. My administrative staff was already bustling around the pristine workstations preparing for a fully booked week of property tours. I had built an absolute empire from the ashes of my toxic past. My relentless drive and ruthless efficiency had not gone unnoticed by the financial media. Just 3 weeks prior to the grand opening, a team of journalists and photographers from Forbes magazine had spent 2 days shadowing me. They were writing a massive feature for their prestigious Top Brokers Under 40 issue. The glossy magazine had hit the newsstands that morning, and copies were strategically placed on every glass coffee table in our new waiting areas. I walked into my corner office on the top floor and picked up a fresh copy of the magazine from my custom mahogany desk. There I was on the glossy page wearing a sharp-tailored emerald suit, looking out over the Atlanta skyline with absolute supreme confidence. The photograph perfectly captured the fierce independence I had fought so incredibly hard to achieve. The journalist had written an extensive 6-page spread detailing my rapid rise to the top of the commercial real estate market. But there was one specific paragraph that made me smile every single time I read it. The author praised my aggressive negotiation tactics and my flawless portfolio management. Then they included a bold, highlighted quote from Mr. Sterling, my largest billionaire client. He told the reporter that my ultimate strength was my uncanny ability to navigate incredibly complex financial crises with a remarkably cool head. The sheer irony of that specific quote was absolutely delicious. The financial media and my wealthy corporate clients believed my cool head was forged in the competitive fires of corporate boardrooms. They assumed my ruthless efficiency was a strategy learned from veteran industry mentors. They had absolutely no idea my ability to handle massive financial disasters was actually forged by surviving a toxic mother who stole $125,000 to fund a fake luxury wedding for an unemployed golden child. They did not know navigating a complex crisis simply meant shutting off my emotions while my own flesh and blood tried to send me to federal prison. The trauma meant to completely destroy my life had secretly become my greatest corporate asset. I placed the glossy magazine back onto my heavy mahogany desk and walked over to the prominent feature wall near my massive floor-to-ceiling windows. I had hired a framer to create a beautiful gallery space in my private office. I reached into a padded box and pulled out a heavy black and gold frame containing the original Forbes magazine spread. I carefully hung it on the wall, perfectly centered under the warm gallery lighting. Then I reached into the box one final time and pulled out a second matching frame. I hung it exactly 1 inch to the right of my prestigious magazine feature. Inside the second frame, sitting perfectly preserved behind museum glass, was a stark reminder of exactly where I came from and exactly what I had defeated. It was a high-resolution copy of the fraudulent document and the voided corporate bank check Brenda Washington proudly slid across a bank teller counter to steal my livelihood. Every time a major client walked into my office, they would see my brilliant present beside my dark past. I stood back and admired the two framed documents hanging side by side. The ultimate symbol of my national success was resting perfectly next to the ultimate symbol of their absolute failure. I stood there for a long time just looking at those two frames. They say blood is thicker than water. But blood can also be toxic, and if you do not filter it out, it will kill you. For my entire life, I was told that family was the absolute most important thing in the entire world. I was explicitly taught to sacrifice my own happiness, my own financial stability, and my own peace of mind, simply because we shared the exact same DNA. This is the harsh, crushing reality of the black tax that no one ever wants to talk about out loud. It is the unspoken toxic expectation that the very moment you achieve any level of success, you are automatically financially responsible for every single person who shares your last name. But it is even deeper and much more insidious than just money. It is the heavy, suffocating expectation placed specifically on women to constantly fix the massive mistakes of entitled men. From the time we were children, my mother groomed me to be the ultimate safety net for her precious golden boy. If Jamal fell, I was expected to lay down on the concrete so he would have a soft place to land. If Jamal wanted a luxury wedding to impress a gold digger, I was expected to silently foot the massive bill, even if it meant risking a federal prison sentence. Women are constantly told to shrink themselves to hide their fierce ambition and to drain their own hard-earned resources just to prop up men who completely refuse to stand on their own 2 feet. We are quickly called selfish when we finally establish basic boundaries. We are quickly labeled as cold-hearted monsters when we refuse to be financially abused by our own parents. But refusing to be a victim is not monstrous at all. It is basic human survival. When my brother demanded that I pay for his ridiculous facade, he was not asking for my loving help. He was demanding my absolute destruction. He desperately wanted to consume my success because he was entirely incapable of building his own legacy. And my own mother was perfectly willing to serve my entire life to him on a silver platter just to maintain her illusion of perfection. Breaking generational curses does not usually look like a peaceful family therapy session. Sometimes breaking a generational curse looks like filing a formal police report against your own mother. Sometimes it looks like serving your older brother with a legal eviction notice while the neighbors record it on their phones. It looks like sitting completely alone in a massive federal courtroom, watching the exact people who were supposed to protect you face the severe consequences of their own malicious actions. People will try to guilt-trip you using religion or toxic loyalty. They will tell you to forgive and forget for the sake of the family image. But you absolutely cannot build a solid financial empire on a foundation of constant manipulation and endless theft. The black tax is not a noble family sacrifice. It is a massive financial anchor designed to deliberately drown the only person brave enough to actually learn how to swim. I had to learn the very hard way that you cannot save people who are actively trying to hold your head underwater. You have to fiercely save yourself. You have to be willing to confidently walk away from the table when mutual respect and basic human decency are no longer being served. You have to be willing to let the golden child fall flat on his face and let the toxic enablers face the harsh, bitter reality of their own terrible choices. Today, I run a multi-million-dollar commercial real estate firm because I finally stopped funding my own blatant disrespect. I sleep perfectly soundly in my luxury penthouse every single night because I completely removed the emotional parasites from my life. I traded their endless chaotic drama for absolute silence and massive financial growth. It took years of intense struggle to finally realize my own self-worth was not directly tied to their endless approval. You owe absolutely nothing to the people who are constantly trying to break your spirit. Let them call you the villain in their heavily fabricated stories. Their false opinions can no longer affect my massive, beautiful success. Now, I want to hear from all of you watching this video. Have you ever had to legally protect yourself from your own family? Drop your story in the comments below. Do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more content, and always remember one very important truth. Your peace of mind is the most expensive asset you own. Protect it at all costs. The story of Kendra and her family illustrates a harsh but necessary truth. Sharing DNA does not obligate you to finance another person's dysfunction. The overarching lesson here is that setting ironclad boundaries with toxic family members is not an act of cruelty. It is a fundamental act of self-preservation. For far too long, society has weaponized the concept of family loyalty, twisting it into a guilt trip designed to force successful individuals to absorb the devastating consequences of their relatives' reckless choices. Kendra's mother and brother operated under the deeply flawed assumption that her hard-earned success was a collective family asset. They genuinely believed that familial bonds granted them a free pass to commit federal fraud, steal her livelihood, and demand her immediate protection when the authorities rightfully intervened. By refusing to shield them from the severe legal and financial fallout of their own actions, Kendra shattered a generational cycle of enablement. She recognized that constantly rescuing an entitled golden child only breeds further dysfunction, while entirely destroying the rescuer in the process. True love and respect within a family should always be reciprocal, not parasitic. When family loyalty is only invoked to actively extract money, resources, or blind compliance, it completely ceases to be love and quickly becomes exploitation. Walking away from blood relatives who actively plot your ruin requires immense courage, but it is often the only way to safeguard your future. We must normalize the reality that cutting ties with toxic enablers is a healthy, valid choice. Your peace of mind, your financial stability, and your mental health are infinitely more valuable than maintaining a fabricated image of a perfect, happy family. Take a hard look at your own family relationships, firmly establish your non-negotiable personal boundaries, and fiercely prioritize your own lasting peace of mind.